What's up, guys? So today on the podcast, I bring my friend Ethan. If you guys watched the YouTube video we did, we talked about strength training. He is a trainer. He's a brown belt in Jiu-Jitsu. He's also done some like bodybuilding shows. Him and his wife are both fitness coaches. And so during the podcast, we wanted to focus on diet for you guys, diet nutrition. So we're going to talk about diet, how he comes to the right diet for an athlete and, for that's involved in performance. We touch on, keto. We touch on fasting. We also touch on eating a Pop-Tart and having six-pack abs. So that'll be kind of fun for you guys to listen to. So with that said, guys, let's bring on Ethan and get started. This is Ethan, and Ethan is we were joking around calling each other meatheads. Ethan is a really knowledgeable guy, and down in Costa Rica, we were talking about because him and his wife are both involved in fitness and all this stuff. That's their whole gig, right? And he's been involved in both strength training as well as he's a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. He knows how to very effectively manipulate a diet to get a certain effect, meaning like if he wants to get a little bit leaner, if he wants to get a little bit bigger, he knows kind of some of the parameters to adjust. And it was very much a scientific look at it, or at least a more precise look rather than just this big shot in the dark. We were talking about like lean body mass and all these things opposed to, I'm just going to eat this, and so I wanted to jump into it. But like kind of give everybody a little bit of a background about yourself just to kind of know where you're coming from in regards to your experience and everything else.
Originally, people always ask me when I first started training, and to be honest, I've been training people since I was a little kid. I was kind of that weird kid that built the obstacle courses and made the kids do the push-up contests and all that kind of stuff. I've been ninja courses because that was the cool thing, right?
Okay.
So, and I would run them through these ninja courses and basically train them how to do this ninja course. And this started when I was probably like 10, 11, 12 years old. And I also like on the side stole some Kung Fu theater moves and would teach Kung Fu on the side to all the neighborhood kids, even though I had no idea what I was doing. Yeah. So that's actually when I started training people. And it's kind of funny because I was a trainer for so long and I was helping people, not realizing that it was actually a career. And I was actually a manager at Kinko's, and a buddy of mine told me, he's like, hey man, like all the stuff you're doing, people get paid for this. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Why would somebody get paid for this? It's, and I looked into it, and then, that was in 2000. And that's when I got my first certification. And, that was before, and it's crazy to think about, but really that's before like you can find everything on the internet. I mean,
right. I
don't think Google existed yet. So I actually had to drive. It was an 18-hour drive to go take my 2-day certification course, which at least at the door. And then I got my first job at a gym. It's been, almost 19 years that I'm a trainer.
So I was, thinking that like, that's kind of interesting because, that's something that I feel like maybe is kind of missing a little bit with the sort of social media instant, like right now sort of mindset where, because I did the same thing with jiu-jitsu, like I was helping people out and then eventually became something. You were out there training people, helping them out, and then it became something. Whereas now people they want to jump to the front of the line instead of like just simply like putting in the work, figuring out how to help people and really bring that value to people. They want to, get the certification and then say, oh yeah, I know so much about this stuff, but it's like, well, you've never done it, right? Like, why don't you go put some time in the craft of the thing first, and then afterwards, after you've actually got a grip on it, then you can come out and like say, hey guys, I might be able to help you out a little bit. So I resonate with that. So sorry to interrupt you.
Well, no, and I mean, there's something to be said about, making the mistakes, and learning from those mistakes and how much time that actually takes to learn from that, because then to be quite honest, I mean, human physiology doesn't change. It is what it is. And really, honestly, what we know about human physiology hasn't changed a whole lot. It's just that it's just a matter of people trying to make money on the obvious, or people trying to make money on the general science of it. And it's not sexy. It's hard to make money on physiology. So you got to make up names for stuff, or you got to come up with a diet, that has some weird parameters, and attribute it to, some fitness model somewhere.
Right.
And that's where it starts to get awry. And then, and you're right. Like I've seen the training industry change significantly simply because people jump in and try and Google stuff. You can get in, you can Google, training programs or nutrition programs, and you're going to get thousands and thousands of them. And the facts are a lot of them work, but they work for different reasons than what you think they're working for. Or they're working in spite of themselves, you know? I mean, in all honesty, a diet, at least to cut weight or cut body fat, you know, you have to be in a calorie deficit. Everybody knows that. Well,
not everybody.
Should know. Yeah, but I mean, well, let's be honest. That's what it is. It's a calorie deficit.
Sure.
And it comes in many different forms, and it looks a lot of different ways. And some people are only in a calorie deficit and blaming it on something else. And you know, if you want to maintain your lean body mass, you have to make sure your protein is high enough to do that. And those are the two primary things whenever I'm building a program, is making sure if they want to lose body fat, they have to be in a calorie deficit. And if they want to maintain muscle, they have to have their protein in appropriate amounts.
So, Ethan, for me, you and I have never met before. What exactly is your background? Like, what certifications did you start with? And then what did you work towards to kind of do what you do now?
My original certification, my first one was International Sports Sciences Association. And they were one of the first ones out there that were really doing certification for the masses. The guy that started it was a guy named Fred Hatfield, who was an ex-power lifter, old school guy. Held a bunch of records for squat, things like that. And he saw the need for, rather than someone just going up to the biggest meathead in the gym and asking them questions, someone to actually have some sort of knowledge that they could pass on to people. So he started that certification with that basis. There were other ones out there. ACE existed at the time. And there are a couple of ones that you kind of had to have go through college to actually be able to actually certify through this thing. Okay. So that was my first one. From there, like every 2 years, you usually have to recertify anyways. That's just kind of part of the way it works. So you do your continuing education, recertify. So each year I kind of added on to that. Honestly, I lost track. Like I said, it's been almost 19 years. I lost track of all my certs. My nutrition certification is technically in performance nutrition. So it's not dietetics. It's not, what vitamins keep people alive, crap like that. It's literally performance nutrition, how to feed athletes for certain events. And that's where that came from. And that was 12 years ago. I think I got my first cert in that. And honestly, like a lot of it is just surrounding myself with really intelligent people. You know, a lot of my friends are the PhDs that people take the research from. If I have questions about something, I can contact them and they get right back to me. So, like I said, it's not, it's science, but it's not rocket science. It's stuff that's been out there and it's stuff that has existed for a long time. And it's just a matter of people understanding, at least from my standpoint, the difference between feeding a normal human and feeding an athlete, which can be two very different things. And I think that's where a lot of the information gets kind of convoluted.
So as far as, training somebody or giving them nutrition advice for performance versus just your regular everyday person, what's like the biggest, variation that you see? Like, what's the main thing you're working on?
The biggest thing I see is just people that understand you have to be in a calorie deficit doing extreme calorie deficits to try and lose weight.
Okay.
And not understanding why their performance is suffering, and not understanding really the role of food and how each macronutrient counts and how it works in the body. Like, your protein, basically that's in charge of all the repair in your body. All your cell repair is all protein based. Your carbs are your primary energy source. That's what your body likes to use as energy. Which is where, you see people trying to drop all their carbs out and still trying to train 2, 3, 4 times a day, or getting ready for competition and really being extreme with it. A lot of times they just don't have the energy. They get sick. A lot of different things happen. Or people don't understand the role of fat. For a long time in, 80s and 90s, that was the big thing. Don't eat fat. It makes you fat.
Right.
Mm-hmm. It ruined people. It caught, male and female hormone production is based on fat. Like you have to have a certain amount of fat. You have to have a certain amount of fat for your metabolism to work correctly. For your cells to talk to each other. So a lot of it is just understanding, getting people to understand how food actually works and not just, I'm not going to eat to lose weight, which in a lot of cases, that's what ruins people.
Yeah. So if somebody is trying to lose weight, is there a certain makeup that you like to use, like percent of protein, carbs, fat?
I always start with a basic number, and that is their body fat percentage. And it always blows me away that people don't know that when they're trying to cut weight, or they're trying to body fat. Like, how do you know what you should actually be at if you don't know what your lean body mass is. I run into this a lot with females who think they should be a certain weight based upon what they either see in a magazine or what somebody else weighs, not realizing that, maybe they want to weigh 150 pounds, but they're holding 170 pounds of lean muscle tissue. So, which means they basically have to cut muscle tissue in order for them to, or lean body mass in order for them to get to their weight, which is ridiculous. Like that doesn't do that. So without really knowing that number, it's hard to go from there. Everything else, if you don't know that number, it's kind of a guess, and you can get pretty close. And I have to do that. I have a lot of online clients that just can't get me that number. But that's the basis, because I can figure out just from basic calculations what you should weigh at a certain body fat percentage. So if you're, 25% body fat, you weigh X amount, what should you weigh at 12% body fat, or whatever you want to be? And that kind of gives people a little better idea of what their goal weight should actually be. Because a lot of people don't know that. They literally are just going by maybe some number they had in high school, which could have been 20, 30 years ago, or like a friend of theirs who, weighs X amount, and that's what they're trying to get to because they want to look like them, even though it's not appropriate.
Now, is there a is there like an ideal? Because I know that, at a certain point, typically, not for everyone, but at a certain point, as you start to lower that body fat percentage, it can sort of, to me, it seems like, when people really start to come down low, there's at a certain point where maybe the performance could suffer. Is there like an ideal sort of range percentage-wise for male and female as far as performance? To look good, but actually
there
perform
is for
well?
sure. Now, obviously, yeah, and it varies. And when I talk numbers, obviously I'm talking an average, which means there's a high and a low.
Right.
But on average with the athletes I've worked with, for men under 6% seems to where you start losing performance. Honestly, like if most bodybuilders are honest, they're usually sitting right around 5%. They usually say, I'm 1% body fat, but not if you're standing upright. You'd be in the hospital half dead if that were true. Usually they dry out really, really, and they look leaner. So, that's kind of where that comes from. So usually about 6% for men. For females, I've seen females perform fairly well at 15% and under. Honestly, though, usually probably I don't like dropping them below that in most cases.
It really starts to mess with them.
It starts to mess with them. Like I said, every individual is different, but estrogen is held in body fat. So the lower a woman's body fat gets, the less estrogen she has, which obviously throws her hormones into flux. That's why I see a lot of that problems. On the converse side of that, which is interesting, same is true with men. So men that hold a higher percentage of body fat also generally hold a higher amount of estrogen too, which is where you're seeing a lot of these, probably a lot of these low T numbers are coming from, or that guys are just more overweight than they used to be. Because you always see this thing like, we have less T than our fathers did, or, our grandfathers did. Well, a lot of it is just that we're fatter than our dads were and our grandfathers were. That's just as a population. I think that's where you see a lot of that too.
Okay.
For most men, I found performance-wise, sticking right around like 8 to 11% works really, really well. In all honesty, most guys are pretty happy with that. You usually see, you're seeing a six-pack at like, 8, 9, 10%. Usually okay with that. For most women, anything around 18, 19, 20% they're usually pretty happy with, and they can perform and maintain that, which is what's more important.
Cool. And then, you're talking about obviously lean body mass. So once you have that sort of lean body mass number, what you're looking like with their body fat. Like, where do you start to go in there? Because again, there's all these different, macronutrients ratios that people use. When you're looking at someone's lean body mass, like where do you start as far as like the protein and the carbs to get into it? How do you kind of like calculate those? And like, what are you looking to do?
Yeah. So if I know your lean body mass number, your optimal protein is, for athletes, it's about 3 grams per kilogram of lean body mass, right? So a lot of people kind of base a lot of people, especially gym people, have heard the 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, right? Which is true of bodybuilders because they tend to be very lean. And so you're not really having to worry about the variances. Someone who's 200 pounds and 6% body fat that it may be, 200 plus grams of protein that you need for that, as opposed to someone who's 200 pounds and 50% body fat. You're not going to need that kind of protein. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
So really, in the only reason you don't see the lean body mass number more to calculate protein is people they don't have that number a lot of times. They have their weight and they have their goal weight. And so they're just kind of guessing from kind of what it should be from that. But in actuality, it's about 3 grams per kilogram of lean body mass. And then we know, from I can generally calculate people's goal body weight their goal calorie intake based upon their actual activity level.
Okay.
So it's just a multiplier, right?
Sure.
So I take their body weight or their goal body weight, and I just multiply it by 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 14. And that kind of gives me an idea where their calorie range should be. And activity level is a tricky one because a lot of people overestimate what their activity actually is. So if you talk to the normal person, they're like, oh, I'm super busy. I did this, I did this, I did this. But in actuality, what they did is they got in their car and they drove somewhere, then they drove somewhere else, and they drove somewhere else. So their actual activity level is actually pretty low.
Sure.
And even in the gym, people will tell me, yeah, I work out 5 hours a week, but you don't.
Right.
Really, what you do is you work out probably 15, 20 minutes, and then the rest of the time you're dicking around on your phone.
Exactly. That was the thing. I was me and my buddy Joe. We were laughing because Joe's he's an Olympic lifter and he records his lifts. And he says, over there for like an hour session, he's like, there's only maybe like 5 minutes or so of like of that particular lift of active time. The rest is you're waiting to get ready for the next one. And someone will say, yeah, man, I was just in the gym for like an hour and a half. And like, well, we actually had like we did a little warm up. We had probably 30 to 40 minutes of active rolling time, right? Maybe sometimes less. And then the other time, that other 30 minutes was spent maybe with a cool down or stretch, and then you were just dicking around talking. Like, that's not a full hour and a half of active, like, hard-ass training. There was a lot of other stuff going on.
Ethan, if somebody doesn't know how to get that lean body mass, what's the best way, or get their fat percentage? Now, there's things out there like, you hold the little handles and it shoots the little electric current. Obviously, you can do skin calipers. What's the best way? And then if somebody doesn't have access to that, what's another maybe okay way that gives them a good estimate?
Yeah, all right. So the bioimpedance ones, like, the ones you hold, like you're talking about,
right?
Or even the scales you step on, which are pretty much everywhere now. They're pretty decent unless you're already fairly lean. What I recommend, because they have such a variance, is to do it at the same time every day for 7 days and just take the average. And that's going to be the number. Calipers, if you have someone that knows how to use calipers, you can get probably within 2% usually. And it's not, they're not 100% accurate. But really what you're looking for is just a number, something better than guessing anyways. DEXA scan is still good. It works better for men than it does for women, even though women use it more because it gives them their bone density number as well. But there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually accurate enough that you could use a DEXA scan. Most women's clinics have them. All athletic training facilities pretty much have them now. Those replace the old school dunk tanks where you exhaled all your air. Which gives most people panic attacks. But that's actually the most accurate way to get it, is that old school way. But that most of the time, unless you have a time machine, they're going to be hard to find. So, I mean, if a competent person with calipers, which most gyms should have a trainer there that has used them, that knows how to do it. If you get it checked, you have to get it checked by the same person every time. There's just a variance from person to person. The more points you do, there's just 5 point, 9 point. The more points you do, the more accurate it's going to be. So any of those methods are fine. The bioimpedance one works fine. I mean, basically what it's doing is running an electrical current through your body, and it's figuring out the time, the difference between electrical current running through water versus through fat mass, and it's kind of giving you a number off of that. So it's not bad. It's just it can vary from day to day, and it seems to be more inaccurate with women just because they tend to carry more water anyways from different points of the day. But if you take an average, it's going to be pretty close. It's really hard to find. It's just that people just don't go through the effort of doing it.
Yeah, and I think probably the importance of it, like you said, you're starting with a number, you're getting, like I said, you get the average, and then you keep track of it on a regular basis, so that this way, at that point, you can kind of at least have some track on that number, so that you can kind of have some sort of measurable result, like, is this body fat average? Is it coming down on an average? We're using that number as just something to work with, and then you can, adjust the variables as time goes on. But at least it gives you some working, some working sort of number, instead of just having a shot in the dark and being like crossing your fingers, like, well, I hope this works.
Yeah. Oh, it's 100% right. That's all it is. You're just trying to pull as many different variables out of it as you can, and calculate off of that. And it's a lot easier off of that.
Cool.
Cool. Oh, let me go back to, so we kind of skipped over this, but so, if I know my lean body mass or my body fat percentage, I can figure out my protein, right? So we know it's 0.3 grams, blah, blah, blah. If I know my activity level, which I can calculate, kind of based upon what kind of activity I put forth in the course of a week, use that multiplier, I can figure out my calories. What I do next, which is kind of backwards from what a lot of people do, is I do my protein first, because that's really not going to change. Your lean body mass isn't going to jump up and down unless you're, doing a lot of Mexican pharmaceuticals or something. But for the most part, it's going to be, because when we talk lean body mass, we're talking basically everything that's not body fat.
Okay.
Right. So that's kind of where that number comes from. So bone, organs, and muscle tissue. So that's kind of why we can use that as a gauge of whether you're gaining or losing muscle mass, because it's your organs hopefully aren't growing and shrinking. It's usually your muscle.
Sure.
So it's not really going to change. The next one I find is actually I figure out how much fat you should be taking in.
Okay.
And that's the easiest multiplier for that is actually I just use goal body weight times 0.4. For some reason, that works out really well. I actually stole that from another trainer many, many years ago, and it's never failed me. So for most people, that's usually somewhere between like 55 and 84 grams of protein a day, which is not a ton. But what I'm looking for is what's optimal for hormones, cell communication, and just keeping the brain healthy. So I want the minimum amount for that, because I don't want a ton of calories from that fat, because that's going to be 9 calories per gram of fat. So that's going to add up pretty quick.
Right.
Talking like, 75 grams. And then from that, so if I know there's 9 calories per gram of fat, then I can calculate that by whatever, say 70 times 9, right? And I know my protein is, say it's 200 grams. I calculate that times 4, because we know there's 4 calories in a gram of protein. So I know those calories, right? So the thing left over is my carb intake. My carb intake is what I fluctuate based upon activity level. So if you have periods of, like say you get injured and you're not training as hard, then basically I drop that carb intake down, because that's where your primary energy source is coming from, right? So it's almost like you have to earn your carbs in a way, right? So if you're super active, you get to eat more. If you're not as active, you eat a little bit less. And that's kind of how I manipulate most people's diets. The only time that'll change is maybe sometimes I feel like somebody's taken in a little bit too much fat, and I can drop that down a little bit and manipulate that some too with the carbs. But primarily, it's just the carbs that I manipulate up and down based on activity level. And that seems to work really, really well for almost everybody, especially athletes. So that way it's easy. If I know what my protein should be, and I know basically what my fat should be, then in periods of, if you're training for, say, a marathon or, some sort of high intensity sport, then you just increase your carb intake. So that's the only thing you ever have to manipulate. And that's an easy one to do for most people.
So how much deficit are you wanting to put somebody in? I mean, so we can say daily or weekly or whatever, and it obviously depends on their goal as well. So
here's what's crazy, right? So, and a lot of people don't do it this way. They'll drop it by 500 calories or something like that. Well, once I figure out what somebody's using their lean body mass, I figure out what they should actually weigh based upon whatever body fat percentage I want to get them at. That's the number I use. So I'm using that to calculate their caloric intake. So I'm using their goal body weight times that multiplier, 11, 12, 13, 14, to figure that out. So what I'm doing is I'm actually feeding the body that you want that's inside of you, not necessarily the body that you have, right? Wow, so if you're 30% body fat, I'm feeding you like your 12% body fat. and that puts you in a correct deficit to get you where you should be. And it's anytime you cut calories, whether it's 200 or 300 or it's 800 calories, you're going to feel it. You're going to notice it. So for people to say like, oh, you have to drop at 500 so you don't notice that you're hungry or you won't be as hungry, honestly, that's a lot of crap. If your protein level's where it should be, that's going to satiate you a little bit better anyways. But any calorie deficit, you're going to be hungry. And then after maybe a week, 10 days of doing that, your body starts to get used to it a little bit more. It's when it gets really extreme when you're talking like, a lot of women get stuck on this 1,200 calories thing, which I don't even understand where this came from. But that's a normal, I can only eat 1,200 calories. I'm on a diet. Like, I don't even know where it comes from. I'm going to blame Gwyneth Paltrow because I can gain her for a lot of things. But, it's just a random number. But once you figure out what it should actually be, it helps a lot. And you can base all the numbers off of that.
Now, what do you say? Because, in the culture right now, and again, this will obviously change again as it just kind of just bounces around. What do you say about the sort of the demonization of carbs? Because, now it's like everybody's saying keto, keto, keto. That's the way they need to go. And if you're not like, whatever, it just like, there's people that have become that like that go into maybe say like become a vegan, and then they say everybody should be vegans, and then you have people that go keto and they're like, oh, this is amazing, everybody should be doing this, and if you're not, you're killing yourself because carbs are evil. What do you say about that?
Well, and here's the thing, and it goes back to kind of what I said before. All diets work on the same principle, really. You have to be in some sort of calorie deficit for it to work.
Okay.
Protein has to be high enough that you can maintain lean mass. What's happening in a lot of cases with keto diet, especially with athletes, is that they're really not doing a true keto diet. In most cases, I would almost bet they're actually carb cycling. So they're probably going 3-4 days of very low carb or almost no carb. And then on the 4th day or 5th day, they're actually increasing their carb intake and basically refueling their glycogen and then doing that as a cycle, which is that's a separate thing all by itself. But and that'll work the same way, right? So, in a lot of cases, the reason people are seeing such a dramatic drop is if you cut your carb intake down for 4 days or whatever, you're basically cutting out cookies, cake, ice cream, trigger foods, chips, candy, all the snacky foods, all the trigger foods, all the foods that people tend to just go straight towards to when they eat. Which if you give people a rule that says you can't eat this food because you'll get fat or whatever else will happen, and they don't eat it, well, of course they're going to lose weight because they're not eating it. And you see that even people demonizing things like cheese or dairy products in general. There's people that have true intolerances to foods, but if you cut out your dairy, yeah, of course you're going to lose weight because you just cut out, and especially something like cheese that's high fat, you just cut your calorie intake down by 200 to 600 calories probably just by cutting that stuff out. Yeah. Right. And so they're blaming it on the food, not necessarily the calories. And it's interesting because if you look at every diet, you can kind of see the trend over time of how these diets work. And there's actually I can't think of the link right off the top of my head. But they actually compared, I think it was 6 or 7 different diets: high carb, low carb, high fat, high protein, like every variance possible. And over a 12-week period, the drop was exactly the same. So what might start as a high curve up and a high calorie loss eventually levels off, or vice versa. It's kind of or you'll have a slow, steady drop over time. But in the end, after 12 weeks, it was pretty much always the same, whether it's high carb, low carb, whatever variance it happened to be. The only factor is that you had to be in a calorie deficit for it to work.
So I guess some diets you'll feel better. Obviously, I think we were talking about keto. You may feel if you're not doing it truly the proper way, you may not. You're doing a carbohydrates, really decreasing that, and then you may just be low energy, I guess.
But even the people that I've seen where they've been keto proponents, a lot of them, when they get into high like sports like jiu-jitsu, where it's a lot of work. I've seen several guys that were the keto proponents or guys like that. They're then saying, well, I'm adding a sweet potato when I'm doing jiu-jitsu because if it's a lifting day, it's whatever. But if I'm doing jiu-jitsu that day, I'm going to need some extra carbs for it, and so I'll do some sweet potatoes or whatever.
Yeah, and you see a lot of, and that's pretty common. And not to say that, and honestly, I mean, if you're an obese person
Mm-hmm.
with a fairly low activity level, a keto diet is awesome.
Yeah.
You will lose a ton of weight. You'll feel pretty good on it because you're not overeating anymore.
Yeah.
It's fairly easy to adhere to if you do it correctly. Where people go off track is they hear that you can eat as much protein and fat as you want, so they're drinking bacon grease and eating as much cheese as they want, and that's kind of where it goes off track.
Yeah.
But it would work great. But for performance wise, for an athlete or someone who's training on a regular basis, your body just prefers using carbs as energy, and that's just the way it is. Now, certain carbs make you feel better than others. I know some people, they can eat a bowl of oatmeal and feel awesome. Other people eat a bowl of oatmeal and feel terrible, like they're sluggish, feel just slow. And that's just, that varies from person to person. I'm one of those people, like if I eat oatmeal, like my stomach just feels really, really heavy.
It's just like a brick in my stomach. Yeah.
And be fine. Yeah.
I'm the same way.
Yeah. And it's just the way your body digests certain grains, and, our stomachs are used to certain things. And a lot of it has to do, honestly, with how we grew up, what foods we ate growing up, our ethnicity. There's a lot of variables in there. Our stomach biome, a lot of people taking antibiotics for a long time, or they were sick as kids, taking antibiotics, killed a lot of their bacteria in their stomach, and it kind of messed them up a little bit. And then their stomachs just aren't used to it, but so you do see a lot of that.
Yeah, that's something people don't think about, is like the effect. I mean, antibiotics obviously have saved so many lives, but people don't think because sometimes people get a little bit crazy with just give me an antibiotic, and it's like, well, hold on a second, like that has some long-term ramifications rather than just getting rid of this this little sickness that you have. And I hope that for anybody listening, I'm not hating on keto, because there's definitely some uses for it. It's just one of those things where I've seen guys come into my gym who, they listen to a podcast or something and they're like, all right, I'm gonna go keto. And then they come in and their performance just tanks. They feel like crap. And then, they have to get back to, eating a reasonable diet. When you were talking about like carb sources, this is a question I get, all the time. I'm like you, I don't really tend to. The only time I'll eat oatmeal is if I've soaked it overnight. Same thing with like quinoa or any of that stuff. It has to be soaked overnight. You guys can look up the research on that, but like breaking it down, like because like nutritionally, quinoa was always like, if you look at it in cultures that where it came from, they would always soak it. But with carb sources, do you have any particular ones that you find to be easy to digest, good carb sources, like maybe something for like a pre-workout type meal that you tend to go to?
Usually the simpler the better, the more convenient the better. So I still, man, I'm a fruit eater, man. If I need quick carbs, I eat fruit. Okay. But my second go-to, which is probably the exact opposite of that, is Pop-Tarts.
I knew you're a Pop-Tart guy.
People are freaking out right now, man.
Oh my God, he's a Pop-Tart. It's candy. Now explain that though, because again, there's a certain reason why you're doing it. Because I know about this stuff, but explain that a little bit. All right,
so. And you have to keep in mind too that where in my world, it's about using food, not necessarily just eating food, right?
Right.
So yeah, I'm eating the Pop-Tart, but I'm using the Pop-Tart. I know what the calorie count of a Pop-Tart is pretty high. I know what the carb content is, which really is about 72 to 78 grams of carbs, which if you need quick carbs, man, that's the way to do it. It's the easy way to do it. The type of sugar that's in it is broken down a little bit differently than like regular, like shoving in like table sugar or something like that. But it's still one of those things. Some people like them, some people hate them. It sits in their stomach bad. But it's about finding it's finding that balance and finding easy ways to eat for your goals, right? So my Pop-Tart days are my high energy days. Training 3 times a day. I'm teaching in the morning. I'm training people all day. I'm doing my strength training, and I'm teaching at night or training at night. So I have to have those carbs. I have to. And for me to sit down and boil a cup of rice is just a pain in the butt, or bake a potato. To grab a Pop-Tart is so much easier.
What's your favorite Pop-Tart?
It's about the same. Your body is going to turn it into the same glucose, going to store it the same way. In the end, it's exactly the same. So it's just a matter of understanding how to use food to your advantage and not necessarily be afraid of it. Because I program Pop-Tarts into people's diet plans. I do it all the time. and they always freak out like, oh, that'll make me fat. I'm like, why? Why would it make you any more fat than, eating a couple bananas or an apple or, a rice or, whatever is equal nutrition content. It's the same.
Well, you're talking also about, again, if you're sitting around just eating Pop-Tarts all day and sitting on your butt, of course. And again, it's a processed food. So it's one of those things where, again, when you're talking about strictly like losing weight and getting shape, stuff like that, you're eating it for a particular purpose. You're keeping in mind all the macronutrients that go with it. It's a much more like I'm eating this for a reason rather than I'm eating it because I want a Pop-Tart. With your Pop-Tarts, What's your favorite one? What's your favorite Pop-Tart?
I go to brown sugar and cinnamon, man. That's
a good one.
The classic brown sugar and cinnamon. But my favorite toasted is the vanilla milkshake.
Vanilla.
I didn't know they had that.
I didn't know they had a milkshake Pop-Tart.
In years,
dude, they're phenomenal. It's when cold, they're not that good. But you heat them up, and the icing on the inside gets kind of melty and like, oh.
So okay, so if somebody's on a Pop-Tart diet, how
it's not the Pop-Tart. By the way, guys, if you see Ethan with his shirt off, the guy's shredded to bits.
Pop-Tart diet, baby.
Yeah,
all day.
so it's not this like because some of you guys may not know him. You can go look on Instagram. He's not like some like big old beer belly fat guy telling you to eat Pop-Tarts to get in shape.
So Ethan, in all seriousness though, if you are supplementing Pop-Tarts into somebody's diet, like how frequently you're having a really hard training day, when would you put that into your diet or into your day? How would you like figure it out around your training?
I generally program around activity level. So, the nice thing about Pop-Tarts are there's two. So you can do one before and one after.
Oh.
If you want,
we need to go get a sponsorship from Pop-Tarts.
Sponsored by Pop-Tarts.
No, I'm working on it.
So, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So, and really, if you think about your carbs as your energy source, especially something like that, it's basically a straight carb. I mean, there's not much else in it. There's maybe 2 grams of fat, 0 protein. So if you think about that, if you compare that to say like they actually make like pre-workout carb supplements, it's almost identical. Yeah. It's a brand called Carbolin. A lot of people use and they mix it up in their shaker, but it's basically the same thing. Right. So if you think of it the same way and treat it the same way as basically just like a straight sugar carb source, that's the easiest way to look at it. And if carbs are going to be your energy source and you want to kind of pack those around when you're actually doing your activity level. So usually, 45 minutes before, maybe 45 minutes after to help recovery.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah. Like, I don't know. In my opinion, I was like, you said Pop-Tarts. I was like, well, those don't seem like good carbs. Is there something like quote unquote good or bad carbs to have?
Yeah. So the downside to things like Pop-Tarts, sometimes even fruit, is they're just not very satiating. The most satiating food in general, and there's actually a scale that they use and a graph that shows how satiating foods are. It's actually one of the most demonized, and that's the white potato, just a good old Idaho white potato. It curbs hunger, makes you feel full, and it's actually pretty simple and easy carb source. You don't have to do much to it. A little salt and pepper. You bake the thing in the microwave for 10 minutes. You're pretty much good to go. They're easy to measure, so if you're trying to figure out, what your carb intake should be, you can usually get within 10, 20 calories by just weighing it out. Mm-hmm. That's the best carb source. And people always freak out when I tell them they can eat potatoes because they've all been told like potatoes make you fat. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you fry them and dip them in ranch dressing, of course they will, Yeah. But it's again like going back to people blaming foods for certain things when that's really not the case at all.
Right.
Rice is still a big one. White rice is fine. People that are into brown rice can do brown rice. Oddly enough, in a lot of it's actually more nutritional than brown rice. Some people don't have the enzyme capable of breaking down that husk on the brown rice. Mm-hmm. And some people actually cause a vitamin deficiency because of that.
Yep.
There's billions of people that eat white rice that are not overweight, do it all day long, every day. And that's, it's still really a matter of preference. When I do my diets, I program and those in mostly for the carbs, potato and rice, mostly too, because they're a blank slate. You can season them a million different ways. You can change things up. If I'm adding fat into their diet, I can calculate how much butter or olive oil I can use in there. It's just, it's easy. It pretty much goes with every protein. I mean, you can eat a steak and baked potato. You can eat, rice and chicken. There's a lot of variances in there. It doesn't have to be gross. Like, you don't have to eat like a gross potato. Like, you can use seasonings and herbs and, salt and pepper. And people, like, they feel like when they diet, they have to suffer and be horrible. And that's not the case at all. I mean, most people would be pretty happy with, slicing up a potato, baking it, seasoning it with some salt and throwing it next to a big steak. That's a pretty solid meal, and most people will be okay with that, but they think of it, I got to eat, chicken and broccoli every day, 3 days, 3 meals a day or whatever. And it doesn't have to be like that at all.
Yeah, and a lot of times, people's taste buds begin to change, like when they get off of like all the sugar, because I know that for me, like, like if I, there's different times where sometimes I'll just eat whatever the hell I'm eating, but I notice that like when I get like, because right now I'm trying to, like, I remember going down to Costa Rica with you guys and I was like, man, I was a little fluffy there, so I'm just going to lose some weight. So in the process of losing weight, and right now I'm like, I don't eat, there's no sugary stuff, except for the only thing I've been really eating is like, sushi. I go out to eat sushi on Fridays, but as far as like sweets and stuff, I don't eat any sweets right now. So I know that as soon as I eat anything sweet, like it'll just be like crazy, but the neat thing is that, like, for instance, I was eating sweet potatoes this week, and that's what I prepped, and I put just a little bit of cinnamon and paprika on there. Yeah. And man, dude, the sweet potatoes, like, because you get away from the sugar and stuff, it's like eating a dessert. They're just so sweet.
It's crazy. That's one of the biggest, is kind of getting away from like that high sugar stuff. And it's, other than it's easy to overeat them and get too many calories that way, you start to appreciate food more, and you start to appreciate the way food tastes. I remember when my wife and I dieted for a bodybuilding show, and we went pretty old school, man. It was dry chicken and broccoli. And, I mean, zero sugar. It was not necessarily the best way to do it. We kind of had a bad coach. But I remember the first time that we had Indian food after that, and you could taste like every little spice. Man, and that was the awareness of that was almost overwhelming. It was really interesting when you realize like how, like, what food should actually taste like, and how you take for granted and just start shoving food in, and as Americans, it's easier for us to do. There's food everywhere. You don't really appreciate what food can be and what it can taste like. And one of the biggest things too is like, is what food actually means to different cultures, and like how social it's supposed to be, and like how we're supposed to, actually enjoy food as a community, and not like, go grab something and eat it in our car at the parking lot at McDonald's.
Yeah.
Like that's like, to me, like, to do that, like, I feel like shameful in a weird way. Like, maybe that's just me and my messed up brain, but it's
it can be so much more.
What's that?
I said it can just be so much more. Like if you have a meal with friends or family, or you can make something out of it. Like I was telling one of the guys, like, he was asking about like, cheat days versus cheat, meals versus cheat weekends. I was like, just go have a good earned meal where you go out to dinner and like go grab some friends, go grab your girlfriend and make a thing out of it, and like really enjoy it. Like just savor that time with those people and enjoy and eat whatever you want to eat, but enjoy it. And then, you go about your way, but don't turn it into a cheat weekend.
Well, and to be quite honest, that's what people want anyways. They want freedom. They don't want that meal. They don't want that cheat meal. They don't necessarily need the calories, because in most cases they're eating enough calories. They're alive, they're moving, they're training. They want the freedom. They want that feeling of not being in food prison. And if you can break out of that and you can make it feel social about it, that's kind of why I program cheat meals into people's food plans, is because I want them to have a day where they don't have to think about food. They can think about hanging out with people. They can go to a birthday party and not freak out about, whatever's there. They can go to a wedding and enjoy themselves and not be the one in the corner, eating out of Tupperware, freaking everybody out. It's an important thing, and people lose track of that. And it's, unfortunately, I do come from the bodybuilding world too, so I know what a lonely sport that can be.
Yeah.
And it's how what a social outcast you can be. So I think it's important when you're dieting or you're cutting weight or whatever, to have that that feeling of being social again and having a life, that's so important psychologically and physically. I mean, your cortisol levels are probably through the roof on some of those days where you're just really stressing out about food, or, sitting at somebody's birthday party and like just really bummed out because you can't have a good time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's terrible on your body.
I think that's a great, you're kind of almost like in a way celebrating food instead of like dividing, because you always know about the guy that's in the corner dieting or whatever, dieting, quote unquote, and
right.
eating, like you said, eating out of Tupperware. And then, but if you make it more like I think it's easier to adhere to a diet as well. If you make it to where it's not isolating yourself from others.
Oh yeah, absolutely is. I mean, and it has to be. And I mean, how miserable do you have to make it for yourself? And I get like some people kind of get off on the whole idea of suffering. And oh, look what I can do. And which, I get that. And, being someone that, anyone that's had to cut weight for a tournament or something like that kind of understands that. And to do it right, you have to have that feeling of like, look what I can do. Mm-hmm. I'm a machine, like whatever. Like I get that. But to do that the majority of your life, like how isolating and horrible that must feel, and being able to understand what food should really be and not, and understanding that it can and it's supposed to have a social aspect to it, Everywhere else, I mean, Chewy, you travel a lot and every time we go down to Costa Rica, like it's like that feeling of like everybody eating together. Mm-hmm. No one's really paying that much attention to like how much food you're eating. Everyone's kind of paying attention to like having a good time and like the aspect of eating for enjoyment, not just eating to be gluttonous, which right. is something that gets lost a lot on Americans in general.
You probably don't eat as much either if you're talking in between, like bites and stuff.
Or you slow down and enjoy it.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. Ethan, I was curious, man, how has your diet changed, since you started out as a young guy, bodybuilding and stuff, and now you're in jiu-jitsu? What modifications have you made because of age and because of, the sport that you're in now?
That's a fantastic question because it has. And it took me a while to learn my own body. I started lifting when I was real young, really like 11, 12 years old. 11, I think, is when I got my first weight set, that old, like, crappy plastic leader one.
Yeah. The standard weights.
The classic.
It was too short. And all that stuff. You had to have the special wrench for some weird reason to get the weights on and off.
I remember that.
Yeah. And so, it was, that was, I didn't really stop lifting after that, and it took me probably until I was in my mid-20s to really understand what food was and realizing how much I was shorting myself, mostly on my protein intake. When I actually did the calculation, I was shocked. And I did the same thing as everybody else. If I wanted to lose weight, I just didn't eat, which was the exact opposite of what I probably should have done. And once I really understood what the role of food was, that started changing everything and really paying attention primarily on my protein intake, and kind of getting that nailed, and that was like my mid-20s. I'll be 45 here in a couple weeks. So that was a while ago. And then I kind of modified things as I went. So, I didn't really get into jiu-jitsu until, several years after that. And then it was another, like, kind of trying to understand how to manipulate my diet based on that activity level. Cause it was different. Cause I was still lifting. Mm-hmm. Then I was adding jiu-jitsu on top of that and trying to figure out, okay, where should my energy sources be coming from? How do I eat but not gain too much weight? How do I keep my muscle mass? And it still came back to understanding the role of protein and how I was able to maintain my muscle mass, and understanding, okay, how do I manipulate my carbohydrate intake to increase my energy level, and kind of getting that feeling and understanding what foods felt good to eat and what didn't. Like, I was an oatmeal every morning guy, and I felt sluggish and terrible, but that's what you were supposed to do. You ate oatmeal every day. Like, right. That was just a thing that you did as a bodybuilder. Right. And then it went to, when I started competing, in bodybuilding, I got a coach who put me on this terrible, terrible diet it was 0 sugar, boiled chicken, of dry, terrible vegetables, very little salt intake, and it was a miserable experience. And I was, we would do fairly well, and then I kid you not, we would go to Krispy Kreme and we would eat a dozen donuts in the parking lot and just sit there and eat donuts because we were so deprived of carbohydrates.
Wow.
And then you feel bad, and then you do a bunch of cardio, and then it ends up being like this weird eating disorder almost, where you're basically binging on these certain days just to get your body back to normal again. And then understanding that that's not the way to do it, once you kind of start to understand that there's a lot of ways to cut body fat that aren't miserable. And it really does come down to understanding, 1, your body, 2, your goals, and 3, the role that food plays in your particular situation or your lifestyle. And that can be anything from like just understanding how many meals you should be eating a day. I mean, especially the old school bodybuilder guys, man, 7, 8 meals a day, which they had to do because they're trying to take in 8,000 calories. I mean, they're not going to do that 2, 3 meals, right? But for other people, that's just a miserable experience to think about, oh, okay, in 2 hours, what am I going to eat? All right, I'm eating. What am I going to eat in another 2 hours? And that gets out of control too. So, it's just understanding that there's a lot of different ways that you can get to your goal without being unhappy about it, being able to fit it into your lifestyle. That's huge. And now, 45, I really started to notice like probably a change in my metabolism, probably about 36. I would say my physical prime was probably about 31. About 36, I started being like I had to make some changes. I couldn't eat everything I wanted now. Metabolism was probably slowing down a little bit, not much, but some. And I made those adjustments. And now, honestly, like the easiest way for me to do it is I kind of just go by how I feel. Like if I need more energy, I eat a little bit more. If I'm not hungry, I don't eat. But my primary focus every single day is making sure I'm getting enough protein, right? So that's a big deal to me. And that's still at the top of the list. There's no day, even if I'm not hungry, that I won't eat my protein for the day because I know how important that is and what that makes me feel if I don't.
Mm. And so what do you think about like with the meals? Like what, again, it's different for everyone, of course, but what do you find optimal? Because like, right now, and you're welcome to sort of chime in on this, there's things like fasting where you'll fast and then you might have anywhere from, maybe 2 to 3 to 1 meal. I've seen people do different, where they do like 1 meal a day and then they try to squeeze everything in that 1 meal, whereas some people will go out to 3 meals a day or, but they'll fast for 14 to 16 hours. What's sort of for you personally, your optimal sort of meal intake? And then you can chime in on the fasting too, if you'd like to.
Yeah, actually, both those. Me personally, I can't do real food in the morning. I have to do some sort of shake. I have to do, at 4 or 5 in the morning usually. My body doesn't like to eat that early, so I'm usually doing some sort of protein shake first thing in the morning. And then I'll do, usually won't eat again. And that's a fairly high calorie shake. I mean, that's, I think I calculated one time. It's like it's 48, 50s. Yeah, it's 62 grams of protein, like 70 grams of carbs, and like 5 grams of fat. So, I mean, it's a pretty decent calorie shake.
Is it just protein? Is it protein in like fruit or something, or just protein in like some sort of meal replacement shake?
It's a shake. Yeah.
Okay.
It's whey isolate. What
okay.
It is, yeah. Yeah, and it's pretty clean whey isolate. And then I usually don't eat again because the way I train, and then I go straight to Jiu-Jitsu at 9:30. I train until usually about 11:30. I won't eat again until whatever's my lunch, and that's usually lately it's been a cheeseburger, but it's grilled at home. 8 ounces of grilled patty, 2 slices of cheese, so I know where my fat's coming from, and the bun is just basically like one of those low carb buns, and then I'll add another carb on the side of that. So depending on my activity level for the day, maybe that's like a Pop-Tart, like I said, maybe it's some fruit, maybe it's baked potato or like some sort of chip or something like that. So I can still regulate my carb intake for the day, right? I usually do another after I lift. I usually do another shake, which is about the same as my morning one. And then once again, kind of manipulate my carb intake off of that, of, how I'm training that day. So what's nice is I can do my protein. I have my protein programmed, and my carbs I can manipulate based upon what foods I throw in there. So maybe I'll bring a banana and an apple, or maybe I bring, whatever other high carb food I want, and throw that in there. And then I'll usually eat again. My dinner is usually very similar to my lunch, same idea, right? So big chunk of meat, some sort of carb, pretty simple fat like cheese or something like that. Butter's on the list too, because I actually need that saturated fat, because this is the way, most guys train. It's important to have keep our testosterone levels up, have a certain amount of saturated fat. And then before I go to bed is Greek yogurt and honey and almonds. And that's pretty much how I eat every day. The only variance is on the weekends is usually when I do my cheat. So I know this weekend, my wife and I have a pizza day planned, so we'll shove some pizza in, So, I mean, there's like I said, you got to program those times to enjoy yourself too. And it's I've been eating the same way for so long. I'm kind of used to it. That's just what I do. And I kind of naturally zigzag, for what I'm doing with my body. I got to, in 3 weeks we have pan, so I got to be a little careful. So I can't let it get out of control. But it's, and a lot of it's just self-awareness. As far as the fasting thing goes, my wife Liz actually does that twice a week. She thinks it helped. She originally started doing it because she was told by an RD it kind of helped with her gut biome, to kind of help reset that, and it helped with certain hormone resets. She's noticed it kind of keeps her from hitting plateaus when she's dieting, so she'll throw in those 2 days. It seems to help her out a little bit more. I have clients that do it every day, and they basically do a 16-hour fast, and they have an 8-hour feeding window. The reason that works for most people is because you've taken out a significant portion of the day where they're allowed to eat, right? So, basically most people will stop eating about 6, 7 o'clock at night. And they'll go until, whatever is 11 o'clock the next day, right? Most of these people are not breakfast people anyways. Usually they feel like they're shoving breakfast in. So, without having that stress of what am I going to, have for breakfast, that takes that out. Stopping eating. That sounds weird.
I know what you mean though. Stopping eating.
It's 7 o'clock. Stop you from doing that, like the before bed snacking and all that kind of stuff that tends to happen anyways. So you're basically cutting down the window of when they're actually allowed to eat. And that's actually, for a lot of people that helps a ton. They only have to think about food for 8 hours a day then, not for, 16 hours a day or whatever, 18 hours a day or however long they're up. And that seems to help a lot and take a lot of the off of it. Now, in that 8-hour window, they still have to get their protein and their carbs and their fat for the day, which can be tough if you got someone who's, got a bunch of muscle on them, that's trying to gain weight. That can be really rough. I mean, you're shoving food in, and that can be a hard thing to do. So, once again, it's kind of based on lifestyle. But I found for most people that intermittent fasting is actually a pretty solid program, just because it gives you a good rule and that you can follow, as long as when you're eating, you're actually eating what you're supposed to be eating. But that goes with all diets, I mean, whether you're fasting, whether you're doing keto, whether you're doing carb cycling, or, whatever diet that happens to be, it all kind of relies on you still paying attention to what you're eating and being cognizant of it.
Awesome, man.
I know I have a lot, I got 2 little kids, man. I work quite a bit. So when I get into train, a lot of times, I'm coming in for a 6 o'clock class, 7 o'clock class, and I'm just like low energy. I don't have a ton of, just don't feel like I have a ton of oomph. So what would you recommend for me if I eat a pretty decent diet, but I'm kind of low energy? Any supplementation or any kind of foods or windows you think I should eat to help my body get some of that energy so I feel better?
Yeah. Some of it has to do with, kind of how you ate the rest of the day before that, prior to that. If you hadn't eaten since noon, I don't know when that last meal was, but, that can be inhibiting all by itself. And by the time you get there, you probably just need some sort of energy source to get you going again. It kind of depends too, if you train that morning, if you need more glycogen in your muscles, that kind of thing. But man, I still go back to just like a banana or an apple or something like that, something that's easily digestible, goes in your system nice and quick. You can carry it around with you, which is pretty fantastic too. There's not much you can, not a lot of foods like that.
Yeah.
It kind of ticks a lot of boxes, for most people. The other thing you could do is, if you, depending on when you ate your last meal, maybe an hour prior to that, just shove down a protein shake or something too with that. Just get your protein levels back up and kind of, sometimes that just kind of cues your body sometimes too, that you're getting ready to do some sort of activity that, sometimes it helps to have that digestion going in your stomach sometimes a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it's, if you're low energy, in most cases, it's, it could be too, and people discount this a lot, but your water intake could have a lot to do with it too.
Okay.
If you're semi-dehydrated, that could be a little problem too. A lot of people just, they're not big water drinkers, so, that may be the other thing too, man. Shove in, a quart of water or something, maybe an hour or so before, and just kind of see how you feel.
That's really interesting. What about, so as far as supplementation, not just strictly food, creatine, you talked about, whey isolate or whey protein. What kind of supplements do you like or recommend for somebody that's training?
Man, I'm not a huge supplement guy. And most people know that, kind of follow me, know how picky I am about stuff like that. There's ones that I go to all the time. Still a good multivitamin mineral, which a lot of people say, it's bogus, you don't need it. I can definitely tell the difference between when I'm taking one and when I'm not, especially as an athlete. I think it's necessary. The other one would be like a D supplement.
Say that
which
again, I'm
most
sorry.
men seem to D supplement.
Okay.
D. D as in dingo.
You just cut out a little bit. So it's like a D3 supplement?
Yeah, D3, right.
Okay.
Right. It's basically the same thing you get from the sun that your body would it's technically it's a hormone. It's not a vitamin. Most men are deficient in that. I've had men go in for to get their testosterone checked and they just have low D. So they can just, basically supplement with that and they feel great. That's a big one. And that's going to vary from person to person. I do about 5,000 IUs, which is kind of in the mid range, usually somewhere between 1,500 and 10,000, depending on how deficient you really are. The other one, fish oil is still a big one. I do krill oil because it seems to be absorbed a little bit better, omega-3 profile. So I'm staring over at my supplements now. I see a box of Pop-Tarts. And those are the big ones, honestly. People get caught up on BCAAs, which honestly, research-wise, it basically showing that it does absolutely nothing. Someone that already has a decent protein intake. It's basically a low-quality – BCAA is basically a low-quality protein is what it is. It kind of got, maybe certain populations, maybe if you're cutting weight, it might help a little bit with preserving lean body mass. But if you're cutting weight correctly or cutting water, if you're like for pre-competition, stuff like that, if you're doing it correctly, it probably shouldn't matter anyways. Yeah. Creatine is huge though, man. And it's creatine monohydrate, nothing else. All the research points to that old school creatine monohydrate, the gross aspirin tasting powder, 5 to 10 grams a day is usually enough. They used to tell you had to load it with grape juice and all that kind of stuff. You don't have to do that. It'll load over time.
It's also a nootropic.
What's that?
It's all creatine. Like it's also a nootropic. So it has a ton of besides just obviously being good for the muscles. It's really it has a lot of usefulness for the brain.
Nice.
So.
Yeah, it's good stuff, man. It's kind of a go-to. I kind of, if you are cutting water weight, it can be a little tricky because it'll add, you could add 8 pounds of water. Sure. And the reason for that is basically it transports with carbs the glycogen into your muscle cells. So it's not like you're not holding the water, like you're not going to look bloated. It's actually just transported into your muscle cells, but it'll hold it in there. So if you're trying to cut water weight, that could be one thing you might have to cut out supplement-wise. But man, it's still a huge one. And then, just a good whey protein isolate. Look at the label, pay attention to what's actually in it. Make sure, it's not a weird mix of a bunch of different hard to digest proteins. The one I use is Syntrax which I can buy at most grocery stores. And it's just a straight whey protein isolate. You know, it's pretty awesome stuff. And it tastes good.
Is there a time that you're taking, and I've heard some different things, but I think the consensus is that it doesn't matter when you take creatine, really, just as long as you're taking it consistently?
Once it's loaded, it's loaded, right? So, and that's the thing, you know, on the bottle, it'll say like pre-workout, or sometimes it'll say in the morning, sometimes it'll say, I mean, it varies because it doesn't matter. So it's, yeah, I mean, once it's loaded, it's loaded. And a lot of it has to do with kind of like what your stomach likes to, you know? I still recommend make with taste decent, because it tastes horrible.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
if you just throw some water and try and chug it, it's pretty nasty stuff. You know, but that can be, you know, you could throw it in your protein shake or whatever. Yeah.
Anything for joint supplementation? I know you took like krill oil can be kind of helpful. I believe.
Yep.
Anything else for joint health?
The biggest one still, like for joint pain, inflammation, turmeric is still huge.
Okay.
And that the research keeps coming back that it's valid, and it seems to help a lot. Honestly, between a good omega-3 and turmeric, those are probably your top ones. Some people respond really well to the glucosamine supplementation, but really only like 60% of people respond to it. But the ones that do respond really well. So,
right.
you know, and you kind of get what you pay for in that. So, you know, it's worth testing out. Something to note too, like most supplements, you won't see any impact at all for 10 to 20 days. You know, so some people take a supplement and they're like, oh, it's not really working. I don't, you know, you got to give it time, man. Give it 2, 3, 4 weeks sometimes before you actually really notice what's going on. And that's a big too.
Yeah, that's the same thing I've heard, because people ask me all the time. I'm a PT, and they ask me about, you know, joint supplementation. And I'm like, look, there's the research is kind of spotty on some stuff, but like for some people, they get really great results. They don't feel stiff if they do joint supplementation. We do CBD, which I think has been helpful for us as well. For me, it's been helpful for a recovery aspect. But yeah, like the glucosamine, chondroitin, I mean, I think I think for some people it's really beneficial because they feel better. And so even if it's placebo effect, fucking do it. You know, I mean, if you feel better.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. I totally agree. And yeah, CBD, I always leave that one off because it's fairly new. Some of the research coming back on especially for inflammation is awesome.
Right.
The downside is that the dosage levels are just extreme and cost prohibitive at this point. I think maybe like once someone's able to really nail down a good production with it, I think it'll help. But man, I've seen they've actually cured rheumatoid arthritis with CBD oil. But the dosages were out. I mean, that was like 5,000 milligrams per dose, which is, I mean, you know, usually it's like 50 milligrams a month or something is what most people are taking. You know, it's outrageous. But there's some cool stuff coming back on CBD. It seems too that if there's about a 2% concentration of THC, it seems to work a little bit better too.
Right. Yeah.
And that seems to be about, you know, 2%. You may or may not notice that, you know, but as far as you're, you know, actually feeling the effects of the THC, but it does seem to work a little bit better research wise.
Right. Right.
It's I'm actually some buddies of mine, a guy named Mike T. Nelson just wrote a bunch of good stuff on CBD oil supplementation for athletes. There's some really cool research in there. So Mike Erzatel, I know, is doing some stuff too. So there's some good stuff out there. And what's cool now too is that guys that are high level athletes are also PhDs that are actually doing the research on athletes, which we've never had before. And it's the last like 5 to 8 years, we've learned so much about things that were like bodybuilding lore and anecdotes, you know, stuff heard from guys in the 70s and 80s, like, oh, you should be doing this. Well, why? Well, we don't really know, but we know it works. We're actually able to research that now and actually come back with answers like, this is why it works. It works because of this, not because of this. And it's cool and exciting stuff. And you know, from the strength and conditioning world, man, it's cool what guys are working on now and how much we're going to learn. And if you think about like what the change in athletes in the last decade, like just looking at like you know, the combine's going on right now, right? So look at like these guys going in the combine that are, you know, bigger, faster, can, more agile,
It's
leaner,
crazy.
stronger. It's insane.
Mhm.
And a lot of that has to do with this research that's coming through these guys. And it's, sometimes you have an athlete and you can tweak him just enough to where he can perform a little bit better. Man, all of a sudden you have a world champion athlete. And it's really cool stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. And training styles and training modalities and everything is it's changing. That's for another time, I'm sure, because I'd love to pick your brain on like strength training and things like that. And as far as injuries go, have you noticed a lot of injuries? We can just kind of touch on that for briefly, but any injuries that you've dealt with, or one thing that you think is the best to do for prevention of injury or minimize the risk?
Preventative, the top of the list is always strength training. Always.
I agree with that. Yes. That's the research I've had.
100%. And it's, and I touched on this when I talked to Chewy in Costa Rica, the amount of clients I have, the amount of people I know that have been told by doctors, if they hadn't been strength training, they'd be paralyzed. If they hadn't been strength training, they would have broke this. If they hadn't been strength training, they wouldn't be walking again. It blows my mind. And it's basically, you're just creating a protective shell around your joints when you're strength training. And if you think of strength training like that, like if you actually come at it from that mindset, which I think most athletes should, it changes your way you look at how you're actually performing those exercises and why you're performing those exercises, and kind of your focus on that. If you're no longer focused on, I want bigger biceps or I want bigger shoulders, but you're thinking about, okay, how can I protect my elbow joint? How can I protect my shoulder joint? How can I protect my knees? When you look at it from that perspective, it changes things a lot in your programming. And I think that's a huge thing, man. I never had a major injury. And I know it's because I got that stupid plastic leader set when I was 12 years old and I never stopped.
Yeah.
I really do. And people I know that have been in the same boat, it's the same thing, man. It's, I'm 45 years old. I know guys my age that have had, I know a guy he's had both of his hips replaced. He's had his knees replaced. Most guys my age at this point, being as active as I have been, I've been an athlete since I was 5 years old. They're getting their shoulders replaced, whatever, what have you. But I think that's a huge part of it. It has to be. And I've never lifted stupid. And that's a big part of it too.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough that I got surrounded by people that knew what they were doing, that can direct me in the right way. And I was smart enough to understand that when I bench press and it hurts, to stop, which some guys don't. They just don't learn that lesson. And that's when they tear shoulders and things like that. And it's about just accepting that sometimes your own ego gets in the way, and that it inhibits your own progress, but yeah. So go back to your question, strength training.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, it's not. I don't think it's quite exactly that black and white, but the research has shown, that's probably one of the main factors for sure. And like you said, you gotta lift smart. You can't be going crazy hard all the time, because you obviously can wear your joints out that way and have a counterintuitive effect, really. But as far as the research, all the other things we talked about, the diet, the supplementation, the stretching, the recovery is very important. But I think the main factor is the strength training, because you're just, you're providing protection for those joints and all those areas.
Yeah,
so.
It's a good way to look at it. And, of course, you're going to supplement in, like you said, some sort of, I'm kind of hit and miss on flexibility training. I have my own points of views on kind of what the nervous system actually should be doing and what it shouldn't be doing. But yeah, if you're an active person, especially if you're involved in a sport, it's just silly, especially in jiu-jitsu, like why strength training was so demonized for so long just still blows my mind. And it still is. I still see people arguing that point. I'm like, why would you not strength train for this aggressive ballistic sport? Like, that's ridiculous. You'll strength for golf and baseball, but you're not going to train for something to break your limb. That's insane.
Yep. Well, Ethan, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, if they want to consult or work with you or get more information from you, how can they do that?
Easiest way, website is bendafitnesscoaching.com, Benda, fitnesscoaching.com. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me. There's a contact sheet on there. My email is bendacoaching@gmail. So pretty easy. That's probably the two easiest ways to do it. I have a couple products out there One that's is sold through BJJ Fanatics called Diamond Protocol. There's probably about 1,000 people doing this program now. It's a 12-week program. Kind of starts from body weight training and moves up. It's a fantastic program. It took me probably 6-7 years to actually develop it into what it is now. But it's the same thing I use for when I'm training special ops guys. I'm training jiu-jitsu athletes, and even training like just casual athletes, because it starts them from basically zero and moves them up to what I would consider like high level athlete level in that 12 weeks. Pretty cool deal. And then I have another video that focuses primarily on strength and it's called Hips and Grips, which you can actually get on the website too. It's pretty, I think it links straight up to that when you open up my website. And then all the stuff I talked about nutrition wise, that's all on the website too.
Yeah.
I actually have some digital downloads that actually teach people how to calculate all these numbers. All the formulas are in there if you need to calculate what your goal body weight should be, understanding lean body mass, understanding body fat percentage, how to calculate your macros, literally everything that I've ever done in, my 6-hour presentations that I do for people, I put into book form. So it's pretty easy to find. And there's also a water cut manual in there too that helps people understand water cuts. So
cool. And and I just say this because I know how some people are, if they don't want to go through the trouble of figuring stuff out on their own, do you guys offer like personalized like coaching?
Oh yeah, for sure. Cool. Yeah. If you contact me, we can do it online. We can do it Skype. We can do it a bunch of different ways. My wife's real good with this stuff too. Obviously we've been training together for a long time. She handles a lot of more physique athletes, if someone's along those lines and wants to look like physique athletes, a lot of time to go to. Her diet program is a little bit different than when I do it, but like I said, it all comes down to the same things, so just kind of understanding food and how to calculate that kind of stuff.
Awesome, brother. Good talking to you again, man.
Thanks.
You too. Appreciate it.
Thank you to our guest, Ethan Benda, for joining us on this episode of the Jiu-Jitsu Podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. We appreciate your support. Head over to iTunes, subscribe, and leave us a review. Extras available on patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu Podcast. And as always, support us and our podcast sponsor, Charlotte's Web. Head over to cwhemp.com, use the promo code Jiu-Jitsu10 and get 10% off your total purchase price of CBD products. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time for another episode of the Jiu-Jitsu Podcast.